everybody, welcome to Money's No Object. I'm your host, Dylan Howell. This is episode number 189 of our YouTube channel and podcast, and I cannot be more excited to continue sharing with you guys personal finance topics that I think could be useful for you in your long-term financial journey. Today, we are going to talk about something that I brought to your attention not too long ago, and I just want to expound on it because more information has come out on the government's willingness to axe something that is specific to our lives. So the article that I want to talk about today is that Democrats may change the rules for Mega-IRAs over $5 million. Okay, and we're going to talk about what that means and exactly where that comes from, why they may change these rules, and exactly how it may impact our investing lives moving forward. So stick around for all that and more in today's episode. Before we get started, though, if you could go down below, hit the big red subscribe button, smash that like button for me. Leave any feedback in the comments down below, and I'll be sure to respond to anything you leave down there. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify podcasts, be sure to subscribe and leave me a review on either one of those platforms. Follow me on social media at MNO with Dylan, and that's really good supplemental materials to all the things I'm putting out in these long-form episodes on YouTube and the podcast every single day. And if you need somebody to help you to build a financial plan and keep you accountable to that plan over the long term, then I can do that. Just DM me on any of the major social media sites and tell me that you are interested in financial coaching sessions, and you and I can begin working together, pushing towards your long-term financial goals and ultimately pushing you on towards long-term financial freedom, which is what I hope for every single individual watching or listening to this show on a day-to-day basis. Now, what's the deal? What's the deal with these IRAs, specifically these Mega-IRAs? Okay, well, if you'll remember not too long ago, I talked about specifically Peter Thiel and his $5 billion Roth IRA. Okay, and I talked about how it may lead to some changes in regulation, and then lo and behold, we see that there may be some changes in regulation and rules about very large IRAs. And this is of no surprise. Typically, whenever the government gets a particular anecdote that they can grab onto, or a certain storyline that meets a certain narrative for them, then they'll take it and they will absolutely run with it. And that is no different in the idea of cutting down these mega IRA accounts. And I say mega, they're saying 5 million or above is considered mega. And we'll talk about some of the specifics here shortly. Okay, but $5 million might not be so mega for too long. Okay, so this is something that I think we all need to pay attention to, and let's just talk right through it. Okay, so I'm just going to go right down the line on this article and talk about all of the things that they are proposing, and then ultimately how it may affect you and I. Okay, so Democrats may change the rules for mega individual retirement accounts with more than $5 million to help fund their expansion of the country's safety net. Mega retirement accounts are among roughly 24 tax categories congressional Democrats are eyeing to help raise money for a $3.5 trillion spending measure, according to a discussion list obtained by CNBC. Okay, so they are trying to get people to take distributions in order to gain tax revenue. Okay. Now, the policy would require taxpayers to distribute retirement account balances that exceed certain thresholds, according to the list, which is a draft of ideas lawmakers assemble before formally pitching them to the House or the Senate. Such a rule would essentially function as a new type of required minimum distribution tied to an account value instead of an age. Okay. So if you aren't privy to it, let me just give you a little bit of the information. A required minimum distribution currently is if you are age 72 or older and you have traditional assets, meaning you have pre-tax assets that you put money in before taxes, you got a tax deduction, the money grew, tax deferred, and now you have to pay taxes on the money when you take the money out. Required minimum distributions are requirements by the government that say once you hit age 72, you have to start taking a certain percentage of those accounts as a distribution in order to basically let the government get their taxes off of that money, because that's what ultimately they're going to do once you take the money out. Now, the list does not specify an exact threshold, but suggests that the limit might be $5 million. It states that the number of Mega-IRA accounts with more than $5 million tripled in the last decade, while the average account balance for the middle class is $39,000. Now, I don't like averages, okay, because averages are heavily drawn one way or the other by one end of the spectrum or the other. Okay, so the average for the middle class is $39,000. That doesn't tell me anything because we're not taking into account age. We're not taking into account, the income of these individuals, how much they've been putting in. I would guess that a lot of those are just really small IRAs that are really dragging down that average. Okay, so putting the average in there doesn't make much sense. But it's no surprise that mega IRAs have more than tripled in the past decade. In the past decade, we've seen a roaring bull market, right? We've seen a lot of great stock market returns. And when that happens, then people's wealth increases, right? So the fact that, people with more than $5 million tripled, not a surprise at all. And really not a surprise when you see that baby boomers are coming into retirement, right? You're seeing a lot of these individuals who were very prudent with their money through most of their working life. You see them getting towards retirement, and there's a large number of individuals. That's the big key. There's a large number of individuals reaching retirement, so reaching the apex of the amount of money that they're going to have in their retirement accounts, before going into retirement. So it's no surprise that so many of these mega IRAs exist now. Now, I keep saying mega because $5 million just doesn't seem like mega to me. $5 million, I mean, yes, that's a very great number to have. You could absolutely live on $5 million for most individuals, right? If you can't, then you just have a very high standard of living. But $5 million just doesn't seem so mega, especially with the cost of living increasing and the value of the dollar declining, okay? But nonetheless, we continue. The policy idea is a part of a broader theme of raising taxes on the wealthy to pay for education, climate, paid leave, childcare, and other measures. Okay, so again, this is just a way in which they're trying to raise taxes on wealthy individuals. Now, to say that $5 million in an IRA makes you a wealthy individual. Yes, you built wealth, but that's not the, people that they're talking about when they say, let's tax people with wealth in excess of, 50 million or 100 million or billionaires or whatever, right? These could just be everyday individuals who invested their way to having $5 million in an IRA. And I would guess that they are not that rare. Yes, they're rare relative to the normal individual. But when it comes to retirement savers, I'm going to guess you could find a fair number of individuals who have just saved and invested their entire working life and gotten to this $5 million number. Now, this does follow a recent ProPublica report, which is what I did an episode on previously, that reported that Peter Thiel, PayPal co-founder, owns a Roth IRA that grew to $5 billion in 2019, up from less than $2,000 in 1999. Now, some Democrats use that report as evidence that the rich are using IRAs as a tax shelter instead of an account in which to build a nest egg. Others, however, don't think that account owners should be punished for amassing wealth within the retirement system's legal guardrails. Okay, now, if you wonder where I fall on this, I fall in the situation where I think that as long as somebody did something legally, you can't take it away from them, right? Don't take away from someone something that they did absolutely within the bounds of the law. But if you want to keep things from happening in the future, right? If you want to keep there from being other $5 billion Roth IRAs in the way that Peter Thiel got his, and we talked about that before, and you can go check that out in that other episode. If you want to keep that from occurring again, then you could legislate against that, right? But don't punish people for actually building wealth within the guardrails of the law. Okay, I think that's not something that should be done. But nonetheless, Democrats have this broad idea that the wealthy are taking advantage of the system and not paying their fair share of taxes, according to Albert Fuhrer, an employee benefits and estate planning attorney in Forest Hills, New York. That's obviously a question of your sense of fairness and equity. And that's really what it comes down to, right? Is what do you consider fair? What do you consider equitable when it comes to money, when it comes to saving for retirement, investing for retirement, right? So here are the unknowns when it comes to this type of bill. Democrats' draft list doesn't provide some key details such as how a proposal would require account holders to withdraw funds or whether it would apply to both traditional and Roth accounts, right? So this is a very, very big point because traditional and Roth accounts are not treated the same. And currently, there are no required distributions on Roth accounts. Now, a mandatory distribution from a pre-tax account would require account owners to pay tax on the withdrawal, and distributions from Roth IRAs would be tax-free, but future earnings on those funds, dividends, for example, would incur tax. Okay, so let me just rehash how this works, right? With traditional accounts, you put in money, you get a tax deduction for it. It's pre-tax money. It grows tax deferred. And then later on, when you take the money out, you have to pay taxes on it. And there are already required minimum distributions in place for those types of accounts in order to take the money out and pay the taxes to the government. Okay. Now, this doesn't require you to take all of the money out. It just you take out little by little over time at an increasing rate from age 72 on within your lifetime. Now, Roth IRAs do not have such a provision. And the reason that they don't have such a provision is because you do not pay your income tax rate on the money that you take out of the Roth IRA. That's the whole point, right? You put in after-tax dollars. You don't get a tax break on the front end. The money grows in a tax-free manner, and then you take tax-free withdrawals later on. And so there are no required minimum distributions for Roth IRAs. But as I said just a moment ago, the key to this is that with a Roth IRA, the longer that you keep it and you allow it to continue growing and growing and growing, that's more and more in the way of gains that will not ever be taxed. Okay. And I guess the thought process is if you can make individuals take money out of a Roth IRA, even if they want to reinvest it into like a brokerage account or whatever, they'll have to pay taxes on their gains from here on out in that particular brokerage account, which I guess is a way to get tax revenue, whatever, right? But it takes away some of the benefit of the Roth IRA ultimately. Okay. But that's an unknown. We don't know how they're going to treat these different types of accounts. It's going to be very, very tricky. If their whole point is to, lock down individuals like Peter Thiel, and what they did, then there's going to have to be some type of provision for the Roth IRA. And I'm sure that's going to leave a lot of people very, very frustrated. But again, no specifics as far as how they're going to treat traditional and Roth accounts. Hopefully, for all of our sakes, they leave our Roth accounts alone. But even if they made you take some out of your Roth account as a required minimum distribution over time, that might not be the worst thing. And especially if it's, of some certain amount, because all that's going to require you to do is just take the money out tax-free, right? And then just allow, you to reinvest the money, and you can reinvest it into something that's not going to create such a huge tax burden over time. You can still be quite tax efficient with your reinvestment and really not ever have to give up too much or really any of the money that you had within those accounts. Okay. But again, the traditional accounts, it makes a little more sense because those accounts would be taxed anyway when distributions were made later on. Now, how many mega IRAs are there out there? More than 28,600 taxpayers held IRAs larger than $5 million in 2019, according to a joint committee on taxation analysis published in July. They account for less than 0.1% of the roughly 70 million taxpayers with a traditional or Roth IRA, according to the most recent IRS statistics. The mega accounts hold a total of $280 billion, according to the committee report, or about 3% of these $8.6 trillion in IRAs. Almost 500 people have IRAs larger than 25 million. The average account about 150 million of those 500. Now let's think critically about this for a moment. Right? If the Democrats are going to want to use this, and I'm just saying because this is what the article said, if the Democrats are going to want to use this in order to tax individuals, in order to be a tax on the wealthy, in order to pay for some of the things they want to pay for, let's just think about this in mathematical terms real quick, okay? So this says the mega accounts hold a total of $280 billion within them. Okay, $280 billion. All right. How much did they say that the spending would cost earlier in the article, right? You go back up in the article and you say, okay, what was the amount of spending that they were looking to do? I believe it was 3.5 trillion. Let's see. 3.5 trillion in their spending. Okay, so 280 billion is the amount in those accounts. Okay, in the accounts, not the amount that would be taxed, but the amount in those accounts. So let's say you just take the 280 billion and divide by 3.5 trillion. That is only 8% of the entire amount of spending that they're looking to do. Only 8%. Then not only is that only 8%, right? That's just the amount in the accounts, and they're not going to wipe out these IRAs, right? They're just going to tax them. So let's just say that only 25% at the most. I mean, that would be outrageous that was done. But let's say 25% of that 280 billion got, actually taxed. Okay, you actually had to pay a 25% tax on those amounts. That would still only be 2% of spending, and my guess is the actual amount of taxation would be far less. Right? So all of this is being done in the name of we want to fund this spending that we're going to do, but ultimately this is not even going to make a dent in the amount of spending that they're looking to do, right? If the mega IRAs are 280 billion, right? This isn't going to even make a dent in the $3.5 trillion of spending. It's not even going to do the slightest bit towards paying for all of that spending that they want to do. So this may just be a situation where they're trying to find a reason to tax wealthy people. I don't know, right? But just based on the math, this isn't looking like something that would make any huge dent in paying for anything that they want to pay for. Now, this policy proposal is not a new concept, okay? President Barack Obama proposed capping IRAs at $3 million in his annual budget. Senator Ron Wyden, which is a Democrat from Oregon, who currently chairs the Senate Finance Committee, proposed legislation in 2016 that would require Roth IRAs to distribute 50% of balances above $5 million each year, which is an outrageous tax. Okay. Anyway, the Wyden proposal is a good guide for IRA distributions should Democrats drum up enough support for the idea in final legislation, which has been said by Führer, who I talked about earlier. And ultimately, what ends up happening here via this policy proposal is that the Roth IRA gets diminished, right? If, in fact, you're talking about distributing balances above $5 million from Roth IRAs, I mean, that is diminishing the ability to grow your money tax-free. That's diminishing the strength of a Roth IRA. And ultimately, what this is going to end up doing is just creating different ways in which investors want to save for retirement over time. Because ultimately, over time, as the dollar is less and less valuable and individuals are able to invest more and more into things like Roth IRAs and are willing to do so, and $5 million doesn't become that much money, and we've seen this many times, is they'll maintain these benchmarks of like $5 million as this limit, right? As this limiting amount, even as the value of the dollar declines. So what will end up happening is individuals will find different ways to save and invest for retirement, right? And what you do is you make individuals who are really willing to, invest and really willing to sacrifice some of their income in order to grow it over a long period of time. You force them into this position where they're like, I'm not even going to get that full benefit of what I wanted to get over time. Because just think, if you're having to distribute 50% of balances above $5 million each year, right? Let's say that, over time, cost of living is rising. Let's say in retirement, you're trying to make 5% on your money each year or 4% on your money each year, right? Well, you'd end up having to make double that just to keep up with the fact that you're maintaining principal of $5 million, because you're going to have to distribute half of anything above that amount to the IRS, to the federal government, okay? So I don't like this particular type of proposal, especially if you're talking about individuals at $5 million, because $5 million is just far, far too close to the everyday individual. Now, I know it's a lot. I do know, don't get me wrong, I know that $5 million is a lot, but as an individual who has goals for investing for retirement, has goals as to where I want to be with my retirement savings and my Roth IRAs over time, right? I want to exceed $5 million. And I think you would like to exceed $5 million too. And I don't want to get past $5 million and then have to pay this extra added tax on top of any other taxes that I may have to pay on that extra money. And I don't want to have to distribute anything over a certain amount from my traditional IRAs. This just seems confiscatory, right? This seems like they are just trying to confiscate any type of wealth in this particular way. Now, that's just my opinion. You can think about it however you would like. I have the feeling that we should be able to grow our money in something that we did legally. If you don't like the Roth IRA, get rid of it. Or if you don't like the ability to buy shares really cheap like Peter Thiel did in the private markets and then they go public and they make a ton of money within a Roth IRA, then don't allow that to happen. Okay. My problem is that individuals who are legally buying mutual funds, buying ETFs, investing in stocks over long periods of time, putting money away, being very conservative, being very, thoughtful about how they're going to invest for the future. And then you're going to basically tell them, hey, take that money away. I don't love it. Now, the only reason that I understand a required minimum distribution from a traditional account is because that money has to be taxed at some point anyway. So it would be obvious that they're going to want their tax, revenue earlier instead of later. Okay. But with Roth IRAs, when you have already paid them their taxes, okay, let's not forget that that's the case. Their taxes have already been paid on the front end. They told you it's going to grow tax-free and you're going to be able to take tax-free withdrawals. That's the whole reason you did this. And now you're basically being taxed on the money over a certain amount that you have in an account. It just doesn't make sense. And it's going to push people away from this particular type of savings vehicle. And this type of savings vehicle is extremely strong, right? And it's something that I try to push people towards. I think it's very, very valuable, right? Now, a caveat to this, and I don't want to give anybody any ideas, okay, but let's not forget that we have other Roth options instead of just the IRAs. Okay. Now, these may be a place where they don't go because people like Peter Thiel wouldn't be able to do what they did within this type of account. You could have money in a Roth 401k. Now, I don't know if they're going to try to dip into that or not. Right? I don't know if the ERISA protection would have anything to do with that, or I don't know. I don't know how they're going to try to tax something that's in an employer-sponsored retirement account. I don't know how that's going to happen. But let's just say that they only relegate it to Roth IRAs and traditional IRAs. Okay, then maybe what you would want to do is keep any Roth assets within your 401k if it's offered to you, right? And invest specifically in a Roth 401k over time. Now, the reason that they might not crack down on something like that is because 401ks are going to offer mutual funds and other basic investment options. You're not going to be able to get in early on PayPal within your 401k, right? And if that's the case, then maybe they'll leave 401ks alone and you'll be able to grow money over the $5 million mark within a Roth 401k. That would be extremely useful, and you could get your money earlier. The only downside is you would have to keep it within a particular 401k, which might have some higher fees over time than an IRA would, and you would have, like I'm saying here, less investing options. But nonetheless, that could be a way that maybe they miss the idea of money growing in that way, and you don't have to worry about it particularly. Now, if the whole idea is to distribute 50% of balances over $5 million each year, then I think it's a pretty easy fix, pretty easy thing that you could do if you're at a specific point with your IRA. If you're at the point where you can actually make distributions already, you can take the tax-free distributions, put it into a brokerage account, and do so in a way that would keep your balance below $5 million in that Roth IRA. And then you may be taxed on any gains that you had realized in the brokerage account, but ultimately it's not going to be 50% of your balance above the $5 million that you had. Your money's still going to be able to grow in a way that can still be tax efficient if you allow it to be. There's all different types of what ifs and what could be's within these types of proposals that come through. And I'm not saying that this type of proposal will go through, but it's something that I think it's just very vital. It's vital to all of us. It's important to all of us, especially those of us who are using IRAs and specifically Roth IRAs in order to fund our future, right? And there's no reason why the average individual should be punished for doing the right thing over a long period of time. Because let's just remember how easy it can be in order to get to $5 million of invested funds over time. So look, if you just invested over a 40-year working life, right, and you invested $790 a month, which I've told you before, if you have a $60,000 a year salary, and you invest 15% of your income, like I tell you to do within the financial action plan, once you're out of debt and once you have an emergency fund set up, right? That's $750 a month. Okay. And that's very, very doable if you don't have any debt and you have an emergency fund, right? So we're saying for any individual, if you invest $790 per month, so $790.63 is the number per month over a 40-year working life, making 10%, which has been gained in the market over the last 40 years, out of the last 50 years, the last 100 years, right? You would end up with a $5 million Roth IRA if you're putting it in a Roth IRA. So this is an average working individual who is out of debt and has an emergency fund set up and has some residual income and can invest larger amounts, right? They can get to $5 million, right? So yeah, I would argue that most of the individuals that do have IRAs and Roth IRAs that are above 5 million, yeah, those individuals probably make more than $60,000 to $100,000 a year. That'd be my guess. Okay, but that's not to say that these individuals who are smart and who are hardworking and who don't make a ton of money over their working life, it's not to say that they can't get to this $5 million point. Okay, and then ultimately, right, if you're going to take this away from individuals, they're just going to find other ways. They're going to find other ways to legally avoid taxes. They're going to find other ways to invest their money. And it's a great place. The Roth IRA is a great place to invest your money, but it still is relatively new. The kinks are still being worked out, right? But I don't think that the Roth IRA should be, looked down upon or eliminated or legislated against simply because you're trying to fund some spending that you're doing. I understand if the reasoning has to do with, this was not the purpose of the Roth IRA. I get it, right? I totally understand that. But you should not ever deter the average individual from saving and investing for retirement, because that's contrary to what I'm trying to do every day. What I'm trying to do every day is to help the average individual to save and invest for retirement. And it's difficult and it takes them a lot of time and a lot of effort, but they could get to this $5+ million level in a Roth IRA, and then you're going to take however much of it over. It just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to me, but I need you as the investor to understand that things are going to be okay. Okay, regardless of if this ever gets through, which there's no guarantee at all that something like this will pass. Okay, but if something like this were to get through, just understand that you're still going to have places to invest, and you probably still should invest in the Roth IRA if what I'm reading is going to continue being the case. Okay, but overall, once you get to some larger net worth numbers, you may start rethinking your allocation and rethinking the way that you're invested if something like this were to ever go through. Ultimately, you can still build wealth. Ultimately, this is not a deterrent from investing. This just may change the way that we think about it. And look, I am going to be here with you every single step of the way, helping you, guiding you, teaching you what is the best way to go through investing in your working life. And trust me, right now, where I'm sitting, I'm going to still put money in a Roth IRA. I'm still going to have Roth assets. That's still the best avenue for me right now. Okay? Now, may that change? It absolutely may, based on legislation. Absolutely may. But we will cross that bridge when we get there. Right now, know that this is still the best game in town and still take advantage of the best game in town. And ultimately, what this article is saying and what this legislation is proposing is not that they completely take away the best game in town, but that they change the rules of the best game in town a little bit. Okay, and maybe not make it the best game in town anymore, or it could still be the best game in town, just have some extra rules associated with it. Okay, so just keep this in mind as you work through your investing life. Keep your finger on the pulse, and I'll try to continue keeping my finger on the pulse of what's going on in the financial world. And hopefully, if something like this ever does go through, I will have something for you here, some guide for you as to how to step through this whole issue of Roth IRAs, and if you're building your assets up to a certain amount. Now, again, for most individuals who don't get to that $5 million number and are just trying to get to $1 million or 500,000 or whatever, this doesn't become a problem. But if you're anything like me, if you're trying to start early and you're trying to get to where I really would love you to get to over a long period of time, then maybe this ends up impacting you. And if it does, I will be ready, and I hope you will be too. But we will work through this, but keep at it. Keep investing. Keep pushing money into those Roth IRAs, because that tax-free money later on is still going to be so sweet. So thanks for watching this video. If you could go down below, hit the big red subscribe button, like this video, leave me any feedback in the comments down below, and I'll be sure to respond to anything you leave down there. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify podcasts, be sure to subscribe and leave me a review on either one of those platforms. Follow me on social media at MNO with Dylan, and that's really good supplemental materials to all the things I'm putting out in these long form episodes on YouTube and the podcast every single day. And then if you need somebody to help you to build a financial plan and keep you accountable to that plan over the long term, then I can do that. Just DM me on any of the major social media sites and tell me that you are interested in financial coaching sessions, and you and I can begin working together, pushing towards your long-term financial goals, and then ultimately pushing you on towards long-term financial freedom, which is what I hope for every single individual watching or listening to this show on a day-to-day basis. So tune in tomorrow as I continue talking about personal finance topics that I think could be useful for you in your long-term financial journey. So thanks for tuning into this episode of Money's No Object. I'm your host, Dylan Howell. God bless.